Medan is to be the first in a series of games called the Dark Pictures Anthology, a run of short games of which the developers claim will be released biannually. Personally, I love the sound of this. As a busy adult, it's sometimes difficult to find time for those 40-hour plus games, so this is a nice change of pace. Plus, I often find that horror stories work better in short bursts. So, how does Medan hold up as a maiden voyage? It's very noticeable that Medan comes from the same developer who brought us Until Dawn, Supermassive Games. There's a very distinctive style to both the visuals and gameplay that makes this a very similar experience to Until Dawn, just on a smaller scale. In fact, an average playthrough will only take around 5 hours. It's also a lot more grounded than its predecessor. That's not to say this game doesn't have its fair share of cheese, but compared to Until Dawn's amount of teen horror tropes, Medan tones things down a lot. The game will start by asking the player whether you want to play alone or with others. At the time of writing, we only have one copy of the game, so unfortunately, I will only be able to review the single player story and the couch co-op. Though, once we do attain a second copy, make sure to keep an eye out on our YouTube channel for a live stream and an online co-op review. I thoroughly enjoyed my time with my first Medan playthrough, though it wasn't without its issues. First off, the visuals are stunning. As mentioned earlier, this has a very similar look to Until Dawn, but certain aspects have undoubtedly been improved. For one, facial animations look incredible. When a character is telling a story or involved in a heavy dose of dialogue, I would often forget I was playing a game, feeling more like I was part of a movie. This was helped by the gorgeous looking locations. Now, admittedly, there aren't too many of them, and the ones we do have often look very similar, but that doesn't stop them looking spectacular. Camera angles were a real highlight as well. I would often stop moving when entering a new room, as the awesome camera angle would lead me to think a cutscene was about to start. This would sometimes make navigating your character quite difficult, but given the slow pacing of the game, I'm more than happy to let that slide in favour of these brilliant movie-like visuals. For a game like Medan, I think it's fair to say that the game lives and dies on the strength of its story, and what we have here is quite a mixed bag. I won't be diving into anything that I consider as a spoiler, but if you want to stay safe, then maybe move on to the next part. Fast forward a minute or so. Still with me? Cool. The story begins with a prologue set just after World War II. We are treated to a bit of backstory on the giant warship in which most of the game takes place on. The prologue was a nice touch, but by the time you know the story and want to experiment with a third or fourth or maybe a fifth playthrough, this opening can become very tiresome. The story then skips forward to present day, where you're quickly introduced to the 5 main characters that you'll be controlling. The pace really picks up by the time events lead you to the abandoned warship, and it's at this point the game begins to really shine. The horror aspects work really well. There were plenty of times where I nearly dropped my DualShock in pure fright, and I'd say that I'm quite numb to jump scares. Due to the fantastic use of camera angles and cinematography I mentioned before, it was the more subtle background movements that would get my heart racing. The excellent mix of this, along with an unnerving soundtrack, makes for a genuinely terrifying experience that often had me on edge. For the actual story, it's hit and miss. Those who just experience one playthrough will probably strongly dislike the story, and you'll be left with plot holes and a half-finished backstory, which, depending on how many clues you found, may or may not add up. But Medan is designed with multiple playthroughs in mind, and the more you experiment and explore, the more you'll get out of the story. It's just a pain that these multiple playthroughs begin to feel like a chore with the game's slow opening. At the time of writing, I still haven't found every clue, but I believe I've found enough in my first 2 playthroughs to have a good enough understanding of the finished story. Although I was hooked through most of the early stages of the game, the finished story does feel a little silly and hollow. It seemed to have more in common with a wacky action-adventure game than a dark and gloomy horror one. Right, end of spoilers. Let's talk about the 5 main protagonists that you'll be controlling. 4 of them are friends slash siblings slash lovers, and the 5th, Fliss, is the captain of the small boat that the group want to take out in search of old war wreckages. You spend a good hour or so just getting to know the characters. Each one will have certain traits that you then have the opportunity to either lean into or change up how you like. This is a cool touch and makes me want to play through again and again just to see how drastically I'm able to change each character. No particular character is more entertaining or boring than the other due to this ability to shape them how you like. Sure, Fliss is always going to be more serious and Brad is always going to be a bit more nerdy, but aside from that, they're pretty much yours to control. Though, I will say I have seen some strange interactions from these characters that feel really out of place due to how I've tried to shape them, especially towards the end of the game, but given the scope of what Supermassive Games is trying to achieve, a lot of this can be forgiven. The voice acting, for the most part, is really good, with Sean Ashmore as Conrad being the real standout, though expect a few lines of dialogue that will undoubtedly make you cringe. I think the most pleasant surprise though was a character simply named the Curator.
Oh, hello. Things appear to have taken a turn towards the spiritual, wouldn't you say?
The Curator works in a similar way to which the therapist, Dr. Hill, did in Until Dawn, though this time the Curator seems to break the fourth wall a lot more than Dr. Hill ever did, and will often criticise you for letting a character die or maybe even ask you if you did it on purpose. He will offer you tips and sometimes spoilers to help you along your journey, and I couldn't help but look forward to these little sessions to find out how I was doing and to see if I'd done anything wrong. I hope he is a staple throughout the entire series of the Dark Pictures Anthology, as he's an eccentric character that I'd love to see more of and could easily be used as the glue to keep this whole anthology together. I won't say much about the gameplay because, as is usually the case with Supermassive games, there's not a lot to go off. Your actions are limited to walking around, interacting with the environment, picking from 3 responses in a conversation, one of which is always say nothing, and successfully hitting QuickTime events. The QuickTime events are pretty easy to hit, and I would only ever get caught out when not concentrating. But one new feature I did really enjoy was the heartbeat counter. Basically, if you're hiding, then you'll need to time the button press with your quickening heartbeat to remain undetected. I found this a lot more difficult than the QuickTime events, and is often where I would fail the most. Though overall, it's nothing special. But the gameplay isn't the reason you should be picking up Medan. I was able to spend a short amount of time on the couch co-op version of the story. Unlike the online co-op, which promises different takes from different characters' perspectives, the couch co-op is pretty much exactly the same as the solo story, with the only difference being you can assign up to 5 players to each of the 5 main characters. Once that player's character has a part in the game, you pass the controller. It's simple and nothing groundbreaking. However, I can see it having potential for some fun moments, as certain mistakes could lead to another character's death, meaning you may have to explain your actions to the person next to you, or maybe the entire room if you manage to cause a chain reaction that kills off every character. Now, before I finish up, I want to quickly touch on some performance issues that I've seen reported in other various reviews. I've read reports of serious lagging, texture popping, and outright game crashes. I just want to point out that although I've had a little bit of stuttering here and there, especially when loading a new scene, it's not been anything too noticeable, and it was far from a game-breaking experience. Though that may have something to do with the fact I've been playing on a PS4 Pro, and I didn't play the game until post-launch, but who knows. Either way, there were no such issues for me. All in all, I had a lot of fun with Medan. The visuals are massively impressive, and the characters are enjoyable enough that it never felt like a chore spending time with them. The short story kept me completely engaged throughout, even if it hit a few roadblocks along the way. The horror is very effective, and although the story will feel full of plot holes after an initial playthrough, you will be rewarded with more of a backstory if you're willing to go back and find all the collectibles, even if that backstory left me feeling just a little bit hollow. Medan has gotten the Dark Pictures Anthology off to a decent start, and I'm left with more than a little hope, get it? Little hope, for Supermassive Games' next outing in 2020. I give the Dark Pictures Anthology Man of Medan a 7.5. Thank you for watching. Did you enjoy this video? If so, make sure to check out our other videos right here on our YouTube channel. And also check out our podcasts. They can be found on Stitcher, Spotify and iTunes. Also, for all the latest news and reviews, make sure to check out respawning.co.uk. And if you're feeling generous, check out our Patreon page at patreon.com/respawning. Anything you can give is a great help. I've been Mikey, and I'll catch you next time.